Imagine walking into a bank, not with a checkbook, but with blueprints, surveillance footage, and months of planning burning a hole in your pocket. You're not here to make a deposit. You're here to take everything. Throughout history, while most people were working their regular jobs, a rare breed of criminal genius was crafting something far more dangerous and ambitious. These were not ordinary thieves or desperate delinquents. These were masterminds, architects of audacity, engineers of chaos, people who turned crime into calculation and risk into reward. They didn't just steal money, they rewrote the rules of possibility. From tunnels dug beneath city streets, to helicopters landing on bank rooftops, from silent break-ins to full-throttle assaults, these heists weren't just crimes, they were events. Planned with military precision, executed with nerve, and remembered for decades. Each one had a signature, a unique blend of genius, boldness, and a touch of madness. But what kind of mind dares to challenge billion-dollar systems? What kind of person looks at a locked vault and sees opportunity instead of impossibility? To understand the crime, you must first understand the criminal. These individuals weren't just smart, they were focused, obsessive, patient. Some had backgrounds in engineering, computing, or security. Others were self-taught, learning from books, films, or inside jobs. What they all shared was a mindset, a refusal to accept limits. Psychologists say that behind these kinds of crimes lies a complex blend of motives. Some are driven by greed, others by rebellion, some by ego, the thrill of outwitting systems built to be unbreakable. For a few, it's about revenge against a world they feel wronged by. For others, it's simply about proving they can do the impossible. One legendary bank robber once said, "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to prove the system could be outsmarted." And that's what separates these criminals from the average thief. This wasn't about desperation. This was about domination, beating the system at its own game. Some studied for months, watched guard rotations, timed security camera sweeps, simulated heists in abandoned buildings. They knew where the weak spots were, physically, digitally, and psychologically. They were planners, strategists, leaders, and when the moment came, they didn't hesitate. Sometimes they succeeded and disappeared without a trace, leaving investigators stunned. Other times, they were caught in dramatic manhunts and standoffs. Some turned into legends, others faded into obscurity. But the impact they left behind, on banks, on law enforcement, on pop culture, can still be felt today. It's easy to label them as criminals and walk away. But to truly understand what they did and how they did it, you have to look closer. You have to ask uncomfortable questions. What if that intelligence had been used legally? What if that determination had been channeled into science, business, or innovation? Why do some people choose a path that leads to vaults and getaway cars instead of boardrooms and accolades? In this journey, we will explore not just the greatest bank heists of all time, but the brilliant, daring minds behind them. The ones who didn't just rob banks, they rewrote criminal history. Some became infamous, some became folk heroes, all of them became legends. This is the world of criminal masterminds. Not fiction, not fantasy, real people, real crimes, real genius. In the world of crime, some robberies pass quietly through the headlines, forgotten in days. But others, they make the world stop. These are the heists that didn't just steal money, they stole the spotlight, shook law enforcement to its core, and left behind a legacy that still fascinates us today. One such heist unfolded in Brazil in 2005. The Banco Central burglary, one of the most astonishing bank thefts in history, was pulled off without a single shot fired. Over the course of 3 months, a team of skilled criminals posed as a landscaping company. They rented a building in Fortaleza, just blocks from the bank, and began digging, quietly, methodically, into the earth. Their tunnel was nearly 80 meters long, complete with lighting and ventilation. On a quiet weekend, while the bank was closed, they broke through the concrete floor and slipped into the vault unnoticed. When staff arrived on Monday, they were missing 160 million Brazilian reais, roughly 70 million US dollars. The genius of this heist wasn't just in the theft, but in the silence. No alarms triggered, no fingerprints left. It was as if the money had vanished into the ground, because in fact, it had. Go back a few decades earlier to Nice, France in 1976, where another masterpiece was in motion. The Société Générale heist, led by Albert Spaggiari, was as bold as it was poetic. Spaggiari and his crew tunneled through the sewers beneath the bank, working at night and resting during the day. They reached the vault after 2 months, but rather than rush, they took their time. Over a long weekend in July, while the city slept and the bank was closed, the gang entered the vault and spent nearly 20 hours inside. They disabled the alarm system, welded the vault shut from the inside, and calmly opened safe deposit boxes one by one. Jewelry, gold, cash, anything of value was scooped up. But the most chilling part? They reportedly left a message on the wall. Without weapons, without hate, without violence. The score? Equivalent to over 10 million US dollars. Spaggiari was eventually arrested, but escaped from custody by jumping out a courtroom window and vanishing on a waiting motorcycle. He was never caught again. What made these heists legendary wasn't just the scale, it was the planning. These weren't crimes of opportunity. They were operations. Every second was accounted for. Every risk was measured. Blueprints were studied, surveillance patterns analyzed. In some cases, insiders were recruited. In others, months of dry runs were performed. The criminals operated like professionals, but thought like artists. They blended engineering, psychology, and even elements of performance into their work. In both cases, tunnels, symbols of patience and persistence, became the secret path to millions. But the true magic of these heists lies in their uniqueness. No one had ever thought to rob a bank from below, or at least not with such sophistication. No one had dared spend nearly a full day inside a vault without being caught. These were not just thefts. They were acts of creative rebellion, bold, risky, and unforgettable. Each of these iconic robberies sent a message to the world that no system is unbreakable, no vault completely secure. They forced banks to rethink their security. They changed how law enforcement investigated organized crime. And they proved that when criminal intelligence is combined with patience and courage, the results can shake the world. These were the moments where planning met precision, where risk met reward. These are the heists that didn't just steal fortunes, they stole a place in history. Behind every great heist lies a mind unlike any other, not just clever, but calculating, not just daring, but visionary. These were not reckless criminals chasing a thrill. They were strategists, leaders, and thinkers, the masterminds. And in many cases, it was their brain power, not their brawn, that made their crimes legendary. Take Albert Spaggiari, the man behind the 1976 Société Générale heist in Nice, France. By all appearances, Spaggiari was an ordinary man, a former soldier, a photographer, and a quiet intellectual. But inside, he nursed a deep mistrust of institutions and a love for spectacle. When he assembled his crew for the bank job, he didn't pick common criminals. He selected skilled professionals, locksmiths, electricians, and tunnel diggers. Spaggiari's leadership style was unconventional, but effective. He inspired loyalty by treating his team like equals, emphasizing their role in creating something historic. He gave them a purpose greater than money. He gave them a mission. And when the job was done, he signed it with a line that defined his legacy: without weapons, without hate, without violence. He saw himself not as a thief, but as an artist of crime. Another mind worth studying is Leonardo Notarbartolo, the Italian mastermind behind the 2003 Antwerp diamond heist, one of the most successful thefts in history. Disguised as a businessman and gem dealer, Notarbartolo spent months gaining access to the Antwerp Diamond Center. He studied guard routines, surveillance patterns, and vault technology with surgical precision. What made Notarbartolo unique was his patience and adaptability. He understood that the key to the vault wasn't just technology, it was trust. He spent years building a fake identity, all to get inside the building. Once the plan was set, he coordinated a crew of 4, each with their own specialty: alarm bypassing, lock-picking, and logistics. Together, they looted over $100 million in diamonds, gold, and cash, leaving behind almost no trace. It wasn't brute force that cracked the vault. It was trust, timing, and talent. Then there's George the Brain Wright, an American fugitive who not only committed one of the most daring bank robberies in New Jersey in 1962, but later escaped prison and lived under false identities for over 40 years. His intellect allowed him to reinvent himself repeatedly, eluding capture for decades. Though not famous for a single spectacular heist like others, Wright's ability to lead, adapt, and survive made him a legend in his own right. What unites all these masterminds is not just intelligence, it's control. They weren't impulsive. They knew how to wait, how to plan, and above all, how to inspire confidence in those they led. They understood the psychology of teamwork, keeping egos in check and operations tightly compartmentalized. Many of them operated like CEOs, choosing specialists for every role, from the scout to the getaway driver. Recruitment was an art. These masterminds didn't post job listings. They observed, tested, and sometimes even staged smaller crimes to evaluate trust and capability. Loyalty was key. A single weak link could bring down everything, and often it did. Their motives varied. Some wanted revenge against a system they believed had wronged them. Others were drawn by the intellectual challenge, beating the unbeatable. A few simply wanted wealth, but even then, it wasn't about cash. It was about conquering the fortress. In the end, these were people who could have excelled in any field: engineering, technology, even military strategy. But somewhere along the way, they chose the shadows. They chose to lead crews into vaults instead of boardrooms. And in doing so, they left behind stories not of random crime, but of organized brilliance. Stories of minds that, for a moment, beat the system. These are the masterminds behind the crimes. Not just thieves, but thinkers. Not just leaders, but legends. No matter how perfectly a heist is executed, there's one thing even the best criminals can't always escape: the chase. Once the vault is emptied and the dust settles, the real game begins. And on the other side of the chessboard is a different kind of mind, one trained to find, pursue, and bring justice. Bank robberies trigger immediate responses from law enforcement agencies around the world. In many cases, it's not just about recovering money, it's about restoring order. The pressure is immense. Politicians demand results. The media amplifies the story, and the public wants answers. That's when detectives, analysts, and federal agencies step in. When Brazil's Banco Central burglary made headlines in 2005, the police faced a massive challenge. The robbers had disappeared without a trace after tunneling into the vault and stealing over $70 million. There were no alarms, no witnesses, and barely any physical evidence. But Brazilian authorities responded fast. They tracked the rental property used by the fake landscaping company and began to piece together the crew's network. Phone records, wiretaps, and financial transactions became crucial leads. Eventually, dozens of suspects were identified. Some were arrested, some were killed in internal disputes. But to this day, only a portion of the money has been recovered. The investigation became one of Brazil's largest and most complex in history, showing the patience and reach of law enforcement when chasing criminal masterminds. In the case of the Antwerp diamond heist, Belgian authorities were stunned by the precision of the crime. The vault was considered one of the safest in the world, protected by motion detectors, infrared sensors, seismic alarms, and a 1,000-pound steel door. But Leonardo Notarbartolo and his crew bypassed it all. Initially, the vault appeared untouched, but when it was finally opened, over $100 million worth of gems and cash had vanished. Investigators found one critical clue: a half-eaten sandwich left near the scene. That, along with a discarded security tape and a trail of DNA evidence, began to crack the case. Surveillance footage and rental records pointed to Notarbartolo. He was eventually arrested and sentenced, though the diamonds were never recovered. Most of his crew remains unidentified, and many believe the real mastermind has never been caught. Sometimes the chase becomes as legendary as the crime itself. Take Albert Spaggiari, the man behind the Société Générale heist. After being arrested in 1977, he stood before a judge in court, but not for long. In a moment, straight from a movie, he leapt out of a window and onto a waiting motorcycle. Spaggiari escaped France and remained a ghost for the rest of his life, allegedly living in Argentina. French authorities hunted him for decades, but he was never recaptured. Behind these investigations are often brilliant detectives who see patterns where others see chaos. They dig through thousands of data points, coordinate with international agencies, and rely on forensic breakthroughs. In recent decades, advances in surveillance technology, cyber tracking, and facial recognition have given law enforcement powerful tools. But the human element, the instincts of a seasoned investigator, remains irreplaceable. One notable example is Inspector Agam Tirana, a seasoned Belgian detective who worked on the Antwerp case. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, he was instrumental in connecting the physical evidence to Notar Bartolo. His perseverance, even when clues seemed to dry up, was critical in securing a conviction. But not every story ends with justice. Many criminals vanish, taking their secrets and their loot with them. Some live quietly under new identities. Others vanish into countries with no extradition treaties. For law enforcement, these are the cases that linger, the ones that haunt. Because in the world of great heists, the crime is only half the story. The chase, the pursuit across borders through aliases into the deepest corners of the criminal world, is where the real drama unfolds. It's not just about catching a thief. It's a race to outthink a genius. And in that race, sometimes the smartest mind wins. Some crimes vanish into court records and cold files. But the greatest heists, they do something more. They outlive the headlines. They echo in movies, books, late-night conversations, and they force an entire industry to evolve. These robberies didn't just take money, they took hold of the public imagination. In the years following the Banco Central burglary, the Société Générale heist, and the Antwerp diamond theft, a wave of films, documentaries, and novels emerged, all drawing from real-life events. Movies like Inside Man, The Bank Job, and Money Heist, La Casa de Papel, blurred the lines between fact and fiction, often portraying the criminals not as villains, but as brilliant anti-heroes. Characters were modeled after Spaggiari or Notar Bartolo, mysterious, charming, meticulous. The world was captivated not just by what these masterminds stole, but how they pulled it off. Why? Because these stories reflect something deeper, a fascination with rebellion. These heists weren't random acts of violence. They were strategic, often nonviolent, and driven by intellect. To many, they symbolized defiance against powerful institutions, the banks, the system, the status quo. In a time when many felt powerless, these criminals became folk heroes, flawed, yes, but extraordinary. Meanwhile, the very systems they infiltrated were forced to transform. The banking and security industries treated these crimes not just as threats, but as case studies. In the aftermath of the Banco Central tunnel job, banks across South America and Europe reevaluated underground vault placement, hired geotechnical consultants, and began using seismic motion detectors to spot subterranean activity. After Antwerp, diamond districts globally updated camera systems, biometric locks, and insider access protocols. Even in law enforcement, these heists triggered advancements. Joint international task forces became more common as criminals increasingly operated across borders. Digital forensics units were created to analyze hard drives, emails, and surveillance tapes. In a way, the criminals made the world more secure, not because of what they stole, but because of what they exposed. But what about the masterminds themselves? Some were caught and imprisoned. Leonardo Notarbartolo, the brain behind the Antwerp job, served time, but has remained mostly silent about the missing diamonds. To this day, much of the stolen treasure has never been found, and many of his accomplices remain unidentified. Albert Spaggiari died a free man in 1989, never returning to face justice in France. For some, the escape was just as legendary as the crime. Others vanished entirely. Members of the Banco Central crew reportedly fled to different parts of Brazil and Europe. Some were captured, others killed in gang rivalries. A few are believed to be living under new names, possibly having laundered their share of the fortune into clean, quiet lives. There are rare cases where former criminals claim to reform. They write books, give lectures, or consult on cybersecurity, offering insight into the criminal mind to help companies and law enforcement. Whether this is redemption or rebranding is still debated. But beyond arrests and escapes, these heists gave the world something else, a mirror. They forced us to ask uncomfortable questions. Why are we so fascinated by those who break the law, but do it with brilliance? Is it admiration or envy? Do we crave justice or just a good story? The legacy of these crimes lives not in the stolen money, most of which was never recovered, but in culture, caution, and curiosity. They've become myths in the modern age. They remind us that genius can come from anywhere, that systems can be broken, that the perfect crime might still be out there, waiting in the mind of someone we'd never suspect. And maybe that's what makes these stories so unforgettable.